Hello, everyone. I am very pleased to welcome you this evening to our webinar, The Emotional Impact of the Pandemic on Working Mothers and Parents. My name is Jessica Muss, Barnard class of 1998, and chair of the Alma Mater's Committee of the Alumni Association of Barnard College. I am also the Barnard parent of a 2024 student. Before we get started, I would be remiss not to mention that today marks 1 year since the killing of George Floyd. I hope everyone saw President Billock's letter to the community after the Derek show and trial encouraged all of us to pause and remember George Floyd's life and remember the fullness of a life. And when it is lost needlessly, how tragic that can be. I encourage you, please, to pause again today. The Barnard community is dedicated to tackling issues of injustice, and we are here to lift each other up in difficult times. And with that, thank you all for joining us tonight. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, there were 2.2 million fewer women in the labor force in October of 2020 than there were in October of 2019. While not the only cause of this exodus, there has been an increase in caregiving responsibilities that may jeopardize women's ability to stay in the workforce and progress. This is the first of a 3-part series that we'll be hosting to address supporting mothers and parents in their many roles during the pandemic. Our second webinar will be about changing your status in the workplace. That will be held in June. And the third will be advocacy for women, working parents, and guardians. That will take place in July. The dates will be announced shortly. This webinar is co-hosted by Alma Maters and Beyond Barnard. The mission of Alma Maters is to provide mothers with thoughtful discussion and programming on all aspects of parenting and work-life balance by hosting presentations, workshops, and discussions that span the years of parenting from prenatal to college-age children. Beyond Barnard supports students and alumni as they define, pursue, and achieve success in their careers and communities. As a quick reminder, this event is being recorded. Attendees will not have the microphone or camera access during this event. Attendees' voices, likeness, or images will not be captured by Barnard College. Written submissions of questions may be shared during the Q&A portion, so please feel free to write in. I am delighted now to introduce you to Tovah Klein, the director of the Barnard College Center for Toddler Development, an associate professor of psychology at Barnard, and the author of a book I'll tell you about in a minute, and Catherine Anicama, Barnard class of 2007, a clinical psychologist who provides therapy and psychological evaluations for diverse families with children between 0 and 21 years of age. During the pandemic, Tovah has successfully run the Toddler Center outdoors, has continued to work with parents and children of all ages, double wow, and is currently conducting a study of parenting during the pandemic. Tovah joined the Barnard Psychology faculty in the year of 1995. Her research, teaching, and applied work is focused on young children and families. I am happy to share with you guys that I was lucky to be one of Tovah's first students, and she has been an amazing advisor to me in college and ever since. Her research focuses on children's social and emotional development, parental influence on early development, and parents' experiences raising young children, including the challenges of combining work and family. She is an advisor to programs for children worldwide, including Room to Roam, Ubuntu Pathways, Children's Museum of Manhattan, and Hunts Point Alliance for Children. She is the author of the amazing book, to which I own many copies, How Toddlers Thrive, What Parents Can Do Today to Plant the Seeds of Lifelong Success. Prior to coming to Barnard, she was a clinical fellow at Boston's Children's Hospital and received her doctorate in psychology from Duke University. Through her work, Catherine Anicama has witnessed the impact of the pandemic across cultural and social groups during the past 14 months. She currently provides bilingual therapy and assessment services for youth aged 0 to 24, and underrepresented and underserved groups at West Coast Children's Clinic, a nonprofit outpatient mental health clinic in Oakland, California. She also provides psychological assessment for children and adults at a private outpatient mental health clinic also located in Oakland. She graduated from Barnard in 2007 as a psychology major, and as a result of her time at the Toddler Center, was inspired to pursue research to better understand how factors such as parenting and family acculturation affect the development of young children of immigrant families. She received her PhD from UC Berkeley. I now turn the program over to Tovah and Kathy. Tovah and Kathy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
We wanted to raise a few questions that maybe you guys can start a small dialogue about, and feel free to diverge. Kathy and Tovah, whoever wants to go first, can you please speak a little bit about your observations of the pandemic and its emotional toll on parents? Maybe you want to start with the very beginning, spring 2020.
So I mean, I'll start, and Kathy's going to chime in, and we're going to go back and forth. So first of all, I just want to say welcome to everybody who's here, and thank you to Barnard for hosting us. So, you know, you can think of the pandemic in a couple of ways, well, probably now in many ways, but first is last spring. When we first had our shutdown, Barnard thankfully shut down earlier than many places, and within a week, just about everywhere was shut down. And, you know, if you think about it, it was very sudden, even though we probably should have known it was coming, none of us did. So there was that fear and uncertainty, and yet that immediate transition to those stay at home, go back home, we all, I think, thought it was pretty short term. So for parents with children, I don't think anybody in a million years was thinking of the next year. It was really like, oh, okay, well, this is not great because maybe you have to work, or you couldn't have your caregiver come or see your the grandparents. But it was kind of like an unplanned, okay, we'll be at home. And I quickly set in, this is not short. I know that as the Toddler Center director as well, it was sort of sudden, and then, oh, now it's going to be long. So that whole idea of that loss of routines and rhythms that then continues, and we have to keep adjusting to, have really taken a big toll on people, children and parents. And I guess other thing I'll say is, you know, all of a sudden for parents, and we know from data, particularly women, mothers, there was this sudden, you're going to be a mother, you're going to be a teacher if your children are online, you're going to be a caregiver if you have younger children, you're going to do all your housekeeping, you're going to figure out how to get groceries if you can't go out, you're going to take care of your elder, it just on and on and on, which is an impossible task. And yet what both Kathy and I discussed when we've met to plan for this is how people took on a perfectionist tendency. I'm supposed to do all of this and I'm not doing it well. So all of those pressures came and continue as the pandemic just wears on and on, hopefully with some ending in sight.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Tovah was saying. I think, you know, in the immediate, it might be an inconvenience, even if it was surprise, but because we had this short-term perspective, it was kind of like, let's just get through this. You know, it's okay if we don't have routines for this week. The kids will be back in school in a couple of weeks. It's okay if I fall a little behind in my work because, you know, next week I'll just be flooded with work, but eventually I'll get to this. And I think the idea was that, you know, we were applying kind of a short-term solution thinking we would get through, but realizing that as each extension came and went, that it wasn't sustainable and having to constantly shift, but having already taken up so much work up until that point, and then trying to find the resources to shift is what made it so hard, because it was a constant replanning, rescheduling of everyone's lives. And that was challenging for parents and kids.
And then the other piece that goes with this, if we could see people, there'd probably be a lot of head nods, is exhaustion. It quickly became exhausting. even when routines are put in place, and if there's one thing I think that we share across class, across culture, across cities, is exhaustion at this point. And again, mothers kind of lifting a disproportionate amount of that, and uncertainty itself, or unknowns, which we've had lots of, create anxiety. Anxiety is exhausting. And it also moves people to a place of a high need for control, because when there's so much you can't control and there's so many unknowns ahead. And think back even to the fall, we had an election coming. We've certainly had a reckoning on racism, uncertainty, and all of that is exhausting, all of us.
And I would say, and as humans, are one of our main ways of coping and reconnecting in times like this is through social connection. We rely on each other to get through difficult times, whether it's just for validation or support, or for more tangible, concrete support. And I think one of the most notable things about the pandemic is just how isolated and disconnected everyone has been. Both, having that concrete, like grandma can't come over to take care of the kiddos, and also just having, your mom's group to vent about the challenges, or being able to talk to your coworkers about how to balance it all. I think being disconnected socially just really adds to the level, because it wasn't just we were dealing with a lot of stress, but the typical coping tools that we would usually have all of a sudden were no longer accessible to us because of the restrictions between seeing each other and going to work and just everything else that came in with shelter in place.
What have you noticed in the behaviors and challenges facing children throughout this time? And how do you think parents have handled that?
Sure, I can start us off on this one.
Great.
I think with kids, it's interesting just to see the parallels between the parents and kids. I think for some kids, it was kind of like the parents, where it was like, oh, it's short term. It's like, oh, an unexpected early spring break, just hang out at home, no homework, chill out. Maybe particularly for the little ones. Oh, mommy and daddy are home too. I get to spend more time with them. Like, great. But I think as parents' stress increase and as things get prolonged, kids also notice, like, hey, they start to question, when is this going to end? Especially when routines kind of got out of shape. Eventually, kids start looking for those routines. Those routines and the structure give them a sense of control, of predictability, of safety. And as that kind of went on, it's kind of, when am I going to go back to school? Why are you still home? What's going on? When do I get to see my friends? And I think that's when we started to see kind of more of the challenges, the anxieties. One thing I think as parents probably struggled with is like what to tell their children, because do we tell them nothing at all because we don't know either? Do we tell them just a little bit? Sometimes do we accidentally tell them too much? And the thing is, this is one of those things where even if you didn't want to tell your kids, there was no way your kids did not know, right? They're talking about school. They're sheltering in place. It's kind of in the air. Everyone's talking about it. Adults are talking about around it. It's in the news, and trying to figure out how to make sense for this for kids at all ages in a way that they can understand, and also validates like how this affects them very specifically, given where they are and what their life is like.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Kathy, I think you said that so well, is, as parents across ages, parents of young children, parents of teens, the issues are obviously different, but in many ways, our questions are about like, how do we protect our children? So for younger children, oh, I don't think they know anything. I don't want them to know, as Kathy just said. They do know, and they knew from the beginning, right? They were hearing words like coronavirus. And interestingly, right as the shutdown was about to start, I was running a parent group and we were supposed to meet. So we met, it was in the evening, and we said, oh, we'll just spread out the chairs. What's the big deal? And, you all can think back to that first week, and we did that elbow thing. We thought it was a little strange, but everybody said, do I need to talk about this with my children? And this was like young elementary school age. And I said, yeah. And I quickly searched online, like, what is a coronavirus? But again, we thought it was, this thing that would pass. And I still hear from parents a year plus later, particularly about younger children, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. I don't really think she knows about death. We haven't talked about it. She doesn't know that anybody died. It's impossible for children to not know that loss is going on. Maybe you had it very close to you, maybe people in your community, or maybe not, but they're hearing about it and they understand that this is a serious sickness, even if you're keeping it light at home. And one of the things that children need very, very, very much is honesty. So truth at their age level. And how do you know when they need it? They show us in their behaviors, so that across ages can be regression. There's a lot of regressive behavior at the beginning, and then sort of reared itself again as changes came, as people move. You might be moving back home if you were staying somewhere else or staying with in-laws or something. Any change brings on that sort of anxiety again. School closing this year after a bizarre year, school reopening. So children are going to tell us they rebel in ways. Why can't I do what I did? Those middle school age children it's rough not to be with your friends. So at each stage, it's really a piece of parents trying to figure out what's going on. Do I need to be worried about this? A lot of negative behaviors aren't necessarily terrible, but they need to be addressed. Why is my child stressed right now? And then this narrative of what's going on. And that's, the honest truth, but at their age level.
What do you think children need coming out of this pandemic? And what guidance would you give parents about supporting children going forward? And are we out of this pandemic?
Oh man, we can only hope, right?
Yes.
I think touching about some of the stuff that Tovah said, and just thinking about all of our kids are going to have different needs, either because of their developmental stages and also just individually, kind of how they've gone through. Because I've seen in the office like a variety of things where there are kids who are very obviously struggling, are feeling anxious, maybe depressed, feeling isolated, worried about how far they've been behind in school, and in a way that parents can clearly see and are worried and are trying to proactively find ways to address. And then there are the kids who I've seen parents who are like, oh, the pandemic was actually great for my kid. They were able to focus more and sit in front of the computer and do really well. And like, it was less distracting and less things that they had to kind of juggle between their peers and all the external distractions and doing schoolwork. And for some of those parents, I would say they're right. For some kids, it's been a lot easier. I also worry that sometimes because our kids may become preoccupied in those things, parents have missed that those kids are also struggling, that sometimes focusing on school is actually a sign of that anxiety, but like, I'm going to fall behind. Like this year, like I can imagine for our like adolescents who were in their junior, senior year and thinking about like standardized tests and applying for college and wondering like, what am I doing? What's going to happen now? How do I start this transition to this new stage of my life amidst of chaos? And so I think kids are going to need a lot of patience and understanding kind of what their unique situation was. Like, what are the things that affected them the most during this year? And how can we validate, like name those things so that they are seen and they are felt, that someone understands what they went through. And it's validating to know that you're right. Like this should feel kind of crappy. It was a crappy year for everybody. And then also trying to play on the kids' strengths and understand that even though it was really crappy, our kids are very resilient and they have done amazingly well. Maybe sometimes better than some of the grownups have done this year in terms of their adapting while we've tried to juggle a million things. Sometimes I see my own little ones and I'm like, oh, you're doing better than I am today. And so I think we see that quite often too.
Yeah, I can build on that, this idea that, children like normalcy. And I think we've seen so much in this pandemic that they adapt across ages. They're probably more flexible than we gave them credit for. But that whole idea of adapting and reminding them, yeah, you did have to go to a new school or you did have to go online. Remember how hard that was at the beginning? And now you're enjoying this aspect of it. So these pieces that were literally thrown at children, and the adults weren't much of a help initially because we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know what was going on as parents, but people adjusted, and children, probably of all of us, adapt the quickest if they feel safe. And providing some sense of routine rhythm gives them a sense of safety. Oh, this is what we're doing. This is how it works. So, part of thinking about what do children need coming out of this, and I'm just going to reiterate what you just said, Kathy, is that understanding the whole world is in a pandemic, right? We're in okay shape now, but there are countries that really aren't, right? But everybody's in this. Your friends in another state, your cousins, and flexibility. So some children are still struggling and still have a lot of changes to come. The fall is going to be particularly hard for some children and not hard for others. I keep seeing and hearing, and I bet you do too, Kathy, about children say getting back to school or getting back to soccer or something. They are just ecstatic. They might be nervous the night before, they run in. Getting back to that social milieu for most children has just been a lift across ages. But also rethinking, so what is it that children need? I mean, there's been a real calm that we were forced into in the pandemic. You can't run them around to lots and lots of after school activities. You can't book your weekends. You can't book every evening unless you want to be on Zoom all the time. So what does that mean if we really didn't rush our children? If we really didn't think, oh, now we have to play catch up, but we said, wow, what did they gain this year? And we reframed a bit what we think children need. And we said, well, emotionally, they really need to be understood and seen and grounded. Would we shift then this thinking about that term, which really just irks me every time I see it, learning loss? Children aren't vessels that every year have to get higher, but testing companies want to convince us of that. So what if we backed off and said, okay, children have learned a tremendous amount this year. Maybe they didn't, read up to the level we thought they would, but what did they get and how can we build on those strengths without feeling like we have to rush them to catch up or to get back to everything?
Yeah, I agree. That's so true. I think my biggest worry is that as we kind of move out of the pandemic or schools start to open again full time, that there is going to be this kind of push to like, okay, things are back to normal. We need to catch up for a year. So let's do twice a year's work in 1 year, which is crazy. And I think, like you're saying, like just looking at kids' faces, my daughter has gone back to school in kindergarten. And while she was anxious to do it, the joy I see on her face every time I pick her up from school just says it all. Like, even though it's a little anxiety provoking to kind of readjust, it's just kids really need to focus on just reconnecting and really refueling kind of all their social emotional needs. And the academic stuff will follow, because you can throw as much academics as you want in them. But if they're anxious, depressed, worried, stressed out, none of that's going to go in anyway. So we really kind of need to reprioritize kind of do our kids need right now and how do we meet those needs?
Going with that, what do parents need? Do you have advice for parents going forward now that we are both in the pandemic and we have a vaccine and hopefully headed in a better direction?
Well, I can start by saying that Kathy and I have been talking a lot about this. Parents need to take care of themselves, and mothers of all people need that more than anybody. This has been and will continue to be an incredibly stressful, rough year plus. And so setting reasonable expectations. What can I really accomplish on a job, and what can I really expect of myself at home? Like, does the laundry have to be perfect? Do the bed covers have to look great all the time? But really taking a step back, I think, for parents and saying, wow, look at what I am doing and I have done. Early on in the pandemic, I was saying, look, if you're getting those children in bed at somewhat of a reasonable time and they're breathing okay and they've had enough to eat today, you've said goodnight and they're asleep, you should pat yourself on the back and say, wow, I did today, I'll face tomorrow. But I think that's even more true the further we go. That idea of lightening up a bit on what we expect of ourselves as mothers in particular, giving ourselves credit for what we've done rather than all the things we haven't done, because there's no way your list of what you didn't do could be short. The list of what you didn't do this year is long, but you could focus on something else, which is what you have done.
Yeah, and I will say I often do suggest that to parents. People talk about their to-do list, and I'm a big advocate for the end of the day. Do the counter to it, write your list of all the stuff you've accomplished. And instead of ending the day feeling stressed out and like you're already behind, end the day with something that helps you feel accomplished and acknowledged for all the, there's a reason you are tired at the end of the day. You worked, you parented, and you did a gazillion other roles that you probably have to do. And taking that time to acknowledge that for yourself, I think is really important. And you also see that in our kids, right? The kids don't necessarily complain about the laundry or all those things. They're happy that their parents were home with them for the most part, for those who had to work from home and got to spend more time with them. And so I think the more, hopefully coming out of this pandemic, we can see some more systemic changes that will help support parents and how they can be more present at home and have more balance. And this way they can juggle all these roles without feeling like it's one or the other all the time, is something that I'm really looking forward to see in terms of policy changes in the workforce. So I'm excited for our June seminar follow-up to this about changes in the workplace.
Just, add to that for parents thinking about going forward, to really think about, what do you really have to do? I mean, for many of us, career goals have shifted. I mean, some people have lost jobs, but some people have shifted career goals. Like, oh, I thought I wanted to aim for that. Maybe not right now. And that's okay to take a step back or to say, I'm going to make a change. It's hard to get a balance, but some of it would be not to jump into, oh, now I have to put all my work things back, all my child's activities back, all. But to say, let me take this one step at a time and see what pieces I can put in place, what supports I can have, and how can I take care of myself, even if that's in 5 minutes. If it's being up before the baby and having a little extra time to yourself, or when my children were young, I always took those extra long showers, because once I was in the shower and the door was shut, right? So whatever little pieces you can do is self-maintenance. And in all seriousness, it's needed more than ever. It's really needed right now.
Definitely. Those of you who have questions, please feel free to start streaming them to us. We are going to be asking your questions. Please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Please tell us, Tovah, Kathy, are there any silver linings in the pandemic that you have observed or heard from parents? Tell us, what is there that we should be celebrating? And I think you're speaking to a little bit about, maybe we don't need to be doing as much, but what are the major silver linings here? And what should we be telling our kids are the silver linings too?
Yeah, I think there's actually many. I think going back to the kids spending more time with family, it just kind of forces us to all be together at home. And while that can be complicated, having everyone stuck together 24/7 for I don't know how many days, there were moments where maybe that wasn't the best idea. But I think it's kind of that time together. Even, I have littles, but even thinking about teenagers who often, developmentally are more focused on their peers, parents got to steal some of that time away from their friends and actually get them to stay and spend time with them during the pandemic by a lack of choice. So I think that family time that we've gotten this year, regardless of all the other stressors that came with it, is invaluable. And I don't think anyone would have gotten that much time without the conditions that we were in, unfortunately. And I think from a structural perspective, I do hold a lot of hope that there is going to be innovation in terms of how we look at learning. Like if you think about, for example, there is a move to look at how we can do like more outdoor classrooms. How do we integrate the outside and our natural environment to just the natural learning that we do as human beings anyway? And how do we integrate that as part of our curriculum, as opposed to kind of read just the textbook and be in the classroom, but really that creativity of trying to understand, like, how do our children learn? Because as Tovah mentioned, they have been learning all year long without having to step into a classroom. So how do we then use that information and use it to kind of create innovation in education moving forward, and moving away kind of from the standardized tests. Like I know some universities after a pandemic have said, we will not look at standardized tests. We don't need ACTs, you don't need SATs, you can just apply. That's like, took this many years for them to realize this, but hopefully that is a sign of more to come. And so I'm really hopeful for that, because that in of itself will also just free our kids to learn just for the things that they want to learn, as opposed to thinking of all the things that they feel like they need to do.
Yeah, and building on that, part of the silver lining really is some of the pressure hopefully being taken off of particularly the academics, right? So the concern is that there'll be this pressure to catch up, but hopefully it's not. Hopefully it really is an understanding that you can actually do college admissions. Barnard's doing its second year, I'm pretty sure, of test optional. We got a great class this year. I have a son applying to college, coming this fall, and the counselor's like, so if your score is not what you wanted, it's optional. I mean, that's a huge change. So all of that then trickles down to, middle school and younger, in terms of hopefully lightening up on the standardized testing. And some of the other silver linings that, I get to see them every day because we have toddlers on this beautiful outdoor classroom on Barnard's campus, is really adjusting. I think parents have more respect now for what children actually can handle. And everybody has examples across ages of their children adapting. But I hear so many stories of that sibling bond, whether somebody says, well, my 4th grade child was home and my preschool child would have never gotten that much time, with her sibling, whether you had a college student who came home for 3 or 4 months that you never expected, that's a silver lining. So that bonding, and because parents were working at home, those siblings really got to be together in all their conflict and all of that, but also working it out and being together. And so that bond has deepened, as well as the family time. So all of those pieces are relational and they'll go forward. That's not just going to go away. You might not be with your siblings as much or your parents as much in the next year, but you've already established that connection. So that kind of flexibility, adaptability, and those relationships really are pieces that children now take with them, right? They don't just disappear. One of the biggest silver linings, I think, really to think about, though, amidst a really hard time, and it's not over. Let's face it, it's not over, but it's far better than where we were for most people. So there's been loss, there's been hardship. There's also been awakenings to inequality and outrageous racial injustices. But we're still here, and our children are learning from all of that, right? Racial socialization, which is Kathy's area of expertise, but starts at the youngest ages. So we've all had our eyes opened to that. But what have we learned? We've learned a lot about ourselves. I think parents have learned a tremendous amount about what you're capable of doing that you may not have known. But I also think it's really important for people to reflect back, if you haven't started doing this, to really think back on this time. What did I do to get here? And what do I see as a strength that I wish I never had to form, but I have formed, or I didn't know I could do? What do I want to do differently, either for myself or for my children going forward? What do I want to do different for my community? So it's not just about us as individuals, but us as part of a much larger picture. And I think that's really been highlighted this year. So that reflection of what do I want to do going forward is really important, and to take sort of the best of a pretty, bad situation.
Thank you. I'm going to pass this over to Christine, who's going to join us with some more words.
Hey, everybody. I'm Christine Valenza-Shin. I'm class of '84 and Associate Dean for Beyond Barnard, and really excited to be co-hosting not just this evening, but for Barnard and Alma Maters, for Beyond Barnard and Alma Maters to co-host the entire series. We're going to open things up for some questions from the audience. And first one is from a parent of an 8-year-old. He has developed a lot of tics and some compulsive tendencies this past year. His school opened a few weeks ago, but the behaviors have continued even though he is so much happier now. Should I wait to see if they subside as things continue to go back to normal, or should I get him evaluated, and by what type of specialist? And this parent also adds, thank you so much for your insights. I was almost in tears hearing your words. Thank you.
You want to start, Kathy? Are you seeing that in your practice?
Yeah. I mean, I think one important thing to think of is that when we are stressed, everyone copes with stress very differently. And sometimes it's more emotional in terms of seeing people saying they're worried or feeling sad. And sometimes we see it show up in our physical bodies, whether it's through tics, kids complaining about stomach aches, kids complaining about headaches. And so I think it's important to notice these things and kind of figure out what else is going around. I also think it's important to know that even if this was triggered through all of these things that have been going on this past year, as we gradually move to some sense of normalcy, it doesn't mean that these things will go away that quickly, because it took a while and a lot of stress built up for that to go down. As a psychologist, I'm biased because I say everyone should go to therapy. Who doesn't want someone to talk to you and figure out how to learn some skills to just better cope with everything that can be thrown at us in life? So I always say there is no harm in, looking for a child psychologist, talking about what your child has been through, what you're noticing, because they will coach you through it. They'll meet with your child. They'll tell you red flags to look for if they're going to need more work, or they'll just work with you for ways that you can support your child, and you'll just continue to monitor and take it step by step. I think the most important thing is just to know that it's been a very hard year for everyone, and just continuing to validate and be emotionally supportive, and then seeing how things change. And you can always get support from a child psychologist to help you through that.
Great, thank you. I encourage more people to join in and type in your questions in the Q&A section. In the meantime, I was curious when you were talking earlier, Tovah, about the Toddler Center and being outside. I'm curious, how long was the Toddler Center closed and/or remote? And then what did you notice? What struck you in the first days of the kids coming back and being back in person?
Yeah, it's been quite an odyssey. So we closed when Barnard closed, and quickly sent home a video to the children. The teachers did that were wonderful, saying, it's not your fault that the Toddler Center closed, and we'll see you soon, because we didn't know when. And then quickly realized, oh, we have to go online for a toddler program. And everybody looked at me on our first Zoom together, and where everybody was deer in headlights, like, we're going to do a toddler program. And lo and behold, like others, we adjusted, and we did. And we said, what are the emotional principles of the Toddler Center, and how do we put this on a screen? We didn't know what we were doing. Teachers were incredible. So we did that through that whole shutdown. And then the parents asked us if we would extend it into July, because remember last summer, we were all still really stuck. But with a lot of planning and unknowns and everything else, we opened this fall for a whole new set of children and a whole new set of parents on campus in this incredible tent. And initially we thought, well, people don't know the Toddler Center. We have parents stay at the beginning. And so even if we went inside, it wouldn't have worked because we needed parents. So we were outside, and then the parents left, and I thought we would go inside by January, which didn't happen. It got colder and colder. So what did we learn? I have to say, I learned so much about emotion. So first of all, as it got colder, as it got rainier, everybody got angry. The toddlers were crying. The teachers were not happy that I was saying, no, we're going to still be outside. And the parents weren't happy. So you really have to think about it in a pandemic, in a crisis, anxiety turns to anger. And so there's a lot of that goes on. And then what did we do? We figured out that we needed to help everybody learn to dress, because I was like, we need a program. We were recording the children so that we could use it for developmental psychology, because they couldn't observe. So we basically found out how to dress for an outdoor school and taught everybody how to dress and got snowsuits for families who couldn't get them or couldn't afford them. So we just made sure everybody was dressed, and then we taught the parents how to dress and the children how to dress, and we learned how to dress. And then we just saw the adaptability of children. So, I have these images of children, and snowsuits aren't as big as they were at one time, but they're still big, with an umbrella in the rain, and the rain's dripping in the tent, climbing all over a slide with the umbrella and the snowsuit, like painting at a table with mittens on. So learning to navigate obstacle courses. And as teachers, they had to really say, like, what do we need to keep the children moving? Because if you're not in New York, it was cold this winter. And we kept it going. We said, how do we get the children to move? And I would say by February, we had no more emails from parents saying my child's staying home today because it's too cold. Everybody showed up. And that's pretty amazing. Everybody, if we had cases of COVID, we got lucky and they were over breaks. We closed 1 week in the fall and then had to go online for when a family had COVID, and 1 week in the spring very recently. But otherwise, we were there live, and we were just trying to figure this out. I think we had 3 weather days. One was a blizzard, but believe me, in the morning, I was like, well, what time is that blizzard going to hit? Until we realized that wasn't fair to the facilities staff, because they had to get the campus clean of snow. So I think we only had 3 days, that was usually from wind, that we actually went online instead. So we learned a tremendous amount about everybody adapting in the best way and filled with joy.
That's great. We've got another question. Yep. Sorry, you get my version of kids at home is the dog at home.
I like it.
Do you have any advice for parents of pandemic babies who were born shortly before the start of or during the pandemic and are now entering toddlerhood with all they've ever known being social distancing and very restricted social circles?
My first advice is send them to the Toddler Center. That will counter it.
Yes.
So if you want to know the truth, for anybody listening who is in this, I'm the least worried about this group of children, because yes, they had the stress of a mommy or daddy or whoever they were with in the pandemic, and that's unusual. But babies and young toddlers truly thrive and develop in the relationship with parents. If they were lucky enough to have a sibling there, then they had socialization. But they don't need peers. They really don't need peers so much later. They don't, as much as they love grandparents, they don't need grandparents right there. It's sad when they're not. But what they need are parents and nurturance and sensitive care. And so as a group developmentally, I think they're in a way sort of the luckiest because they got what they needed from mommy or daddy, although parents were stressed. So I run a toddler program, and I always tell people, 25 years of doing this, you don't need a toddler program. You really, really, really don't, unless it's very sensitive to the kind of mercurial nature of a toddler. Because peer relations really come later. It's your 3 and 4 year olds who really are learning to navigate the social world. But babies don't need that, fortunately. We think they do because of what we've been sold as parents and pressured as parents, but they don't actually need that. So if they've been with loving care, now that things are opening up and you're going to a playground or you're meeting with a family or two that you feel comfortable with, that's their entry, and that's a natural entry point, actually.
And just to add, also the easiest thing for them is they don't know any better. They entered the world and this was what it was like, and they just took it as, okay, this is what it is. And it's a much easier transition when you're not changing from one thing to another.
I think we have time for one more question that came in. Kids now realize that we, the parents, don't have all the answers. We all thought this would be over by now. How do we get kids to feel comfortable and safe despite the understanding that life can be so unpredictable?
That is a great question. And I think in some ways it's been really helpful because kids have gotten to see that their parents are human. That might be a little bit harder for the younger kids, because for younger kids, parents are superheroes and can do things that are just illogical, but they believe we can. But I think what's helpful as a parent is just to remember that there are things that are in your control, and really emphasizing that with kids. Like, yeah, we don't know when things were going to end, but mommy's going to keep you safe, because mommy knows the best place to keep you is at home until we know, people are vaccinated. We know to use hand sanitizer to clean our hands, so that if we touch any germs, the germs are gone. So really focusing on the fact, like, yes, it's true, some things we don't know, and acknowledging again, and I'll keep saying it, naming and validating all those feelings that come up, that they're normal, that we feel them, they feel it, many people feel it. And these are the ways that we know we are keeping you safe, even if there's other things that are out of control. So it's that balance, I think, of knowing that there are things that are in control. And sometimes when we do that for our kids, it's actually really helpful for us as parents. I sometimes do it more maybe for me than my kids, or my kids like, I know, you got me. And I'm just like, I needed to say it myself to remind myself that I have you. So I think it's helpful all around for parents and kids, just to have that reminder that, yes, it sucks. So many things are out of control. And these are the things that are in our control, and we'll be okay.
Great. Thank you for all your questions. I'm going to turn things over to Kathy, who has a sort of closing exercise for us. Or
Yeah, I don't know if the slides are going to come up or not, but in talking about what parents need, figure we would do a self-compassion exercise. I put the website there in case anyone's interested, and I'll walk you through some of it. It's typically done as a writing exercise, but I figure we'll modify it and have it as a thought exercise. So in terms of the first step, okay. So this is kind of a general self-compassion exercise to kind of think of our kind of insecurities or things that we worry about. I think maybe given what we're talking about today, it might be helpful just to think about what is something specific to this year. This year, everyone has struggled in one way or another. That's something that has felt hard for you, things that maybe you have felt like, oh, I was supposed to do this. I should have. All those should haves. Those are all of our insecurities, right? Things that we felt we should have done, that was expected of us for whatever reason, whether it be general cultural expectations or familial expectations, our own expectations. As Barnard alum, I know we have high expectations of ourselves and of all those things that you thought you should have, and maybe felt really bad that you couldn't do, felt really insecure, felt like you weren't good enough as a person. And allowing yourself to recognize that those are the thoughts that are going through your head and how they make you feel when you have those thoughts. An important part of this exercise is just not acknowledging those emotions that come up and just kind of staying with them. Sometimes people's way of coping with these difficult emotions is to kind of push them away and try to counter them right away. But before you do that, sometimes we just need to feel them and acknowledge them. So if you just take a minute to think about all those should haves that you've been telling yourself. And then we would go to part 2. And I highly recommend, when you do have the time, if you go on this website or actually do this as a writing exercise, because then it's something that you can go back to, which is really nice. So for the second part, you are going to imagine a friend. And it could be a real friend, or it could make up an imaginary friend, but just imagine someone who has this unconditional love for you. It's accepting, kind, and this is a person who knows, like, you, all of you, your strengths, your challenges. They know your history. They know how you have become the person you are. They know all the life challenges you've gone through. They know all the accomplishments you've had. They also know the moments when you have fallen down and failed and had to get back up. And so this friend knows you, loves you, accepts you with all of your human imperfections. And that's the important piece, right? We're human. We all have these thoughts of should haves. We all have these things that don't go the way we hope they did. But this friend recognizes that that's because we're human. They are kind towards you, forgiving, and understands why you are the way you are, why you've done the things you've done. And so what you're going to do, holding that person in your mind, is, next slide, please. You would write a letter to yourself from the perspective of this imaginary friend. And so thinking about those thoughts you had about all the should-haves and all those vents and all those feelings that you had about yourself, you would actually write a letter as if you were that friend that we just talked about, that loving, compassionate, fully accepting friend. And what would that friend say to you when they hear you venting and about all these should-haves and all these feelings you have about yourself? How would they respond to you? Would they agree with you? Would they be harsh? Would they judge you and be critical? Or would they remind you that you're human? They remind you that that's normal. Would they tell you those are maybe unrealistic expectations? Actually, if you think about it, what you've done is already so much more than anyone could have thought maybe or should have accomplished to begin with. Would they suggest ways to just acknowledge and love yourself and thank you for the stuff that you have been able to do? And so the whole point as you're writing this letter, because oftentimes it is really hard to do this for ourselves, is to really put yourself in this person's shoes. And even then, for some people, it's hard. So sometimes I'll modify the exercise and do it backwards, make it that you're actually writing a letter for your friend that you love and what you would say to them, because it's a lot easier for us to be kind to others than it is for ourselves. And I say that particularly to parents and moms, because of all these cultural expectations that we have on ourselves as to what our role entails. But it's very, very important to find a way to redirect that kindness in words. And so you would write this letter from this perspective of unconditional love and acceptance and just recognition that you are human. And then you would put this letter away, take a break from it, and at some point come back and read it again, as if someone just really sent you this letter. Don't read it as like, oh yeah, that's a letter I wrote to myself, but really just like slowly in a time away from yourself, take a deep breath and just like read it slowly, letting all the words sink in, and not just reading the words, but trying to really feel that acceptance and compassion on what they're saying, allowing yourself to kind of soak in those emotions and accept it, and to claim that kindness for yourself, that you deserve it, and really let that soak in. And I think, holding on to that letter and keeping it in a safe place so that you can go back to it whenever you need to is really important.
Thank you so much, both of you, Tovah and Kathy, for sharing your valuable experience and your insights with us. One of the things that we talk about a lot at Beyond Barnard is about, particularly in terms of alumni, is providing a safe space for people to come back to Barnard virtually or in person to talk about challenging things. And so, of course, talking about these challenging times and then challenging issues in general around, for Beyond Barnard, it's around work and graduate school and those issues. And for, alumni relations and its many different committees and events, it's the opportunity to come back and gather again and have that opportunity to talk and think and share. So both of you, thanks so much. It was really, really a great conversation. As I said earlier, I'm Christine Valenza-Shin. I'm Associate Dean for Beyond Barnard. And as you may have gathered, it's the relatively new name of the college's hub for advising and resources around careers, internships, competitive fellowships, and applications to graduate and professional schools. As Jess mentioned up at the top, tonight's webinar was the first in a three-part series devoted to supporting parents during the pandemic. The next webinar is one that I'll lead about changing your status in the workplace. So the idea behind that is to talk about, some of the practical realities of what was mentioned here tonight, this intense pressure that many women have been under to work and care for kids and others. And it's led to some people leaving the workforce, some people making changes within it. And we'll talk on a sort of practical level about what to do if you are thinking of leaving, and if you have left the workforce and would like to come back in one way or another, just some of those practical considerations, strategic considerations as we all sort of weather some of these transitions. The final, so that'll be held in June. We'll be releasing the date and registration details very soon. And then the third is advocacy for women working parents and guardians, and that will be in July. So watch for the invitations, and we'll be announcing all the details shortly. I do want to thank everybody who joined us this evening, and keep an eye out for a post-event survey. And also wanted to remind you that Reunion Reimagined starts next week, June 2nd through June 5th. There's programming that will be of interest for everyone, not just alumni celebrating their milestone reunions. Details can be found on the alumni website, barnard.edu. And I just wanted to shout out in particular a workshop webinar that's going to be on Wednesday, June 2nd. From 12 to 1:15, again, hosted by us, Beyond Barnard, Finding the Ideal Career for You. As many people, as Tovah pointed out, many people are rethinking their professional lives, and Lisa Lewis Miller, class of 10, who is a career coach and author, is going to lead this session on looking, sort of taking that time to explore some different options than you maybe we're considering before the pandemic. So again, all the details for Reunion, including that workshop, can be found at barnard.edu. So I'll say goodnight to everyone, and be well and stay safe. And thank you all again.